has spoken. I'd also like to ask everyone to check that their microphones and cameras are off, and please stay on mute unless you are given the floor. Now, with the housekeeping out of the way, and before handing over to the speakers, I'd like to say a few words on the subject of this panel. We'll explore together different topics, and our speakers will provide different views on some controversial themes that arise when we talk about mafia in Italy. More specifically, this panel will try to demystify social misconceptions around the mafia-state relation and the alleged trattativa, or negotiation between them, that took place in 1992. We will then discuss the Nigerian criminal networks in Campania, southern Italy, where trafficking in Nigerian women and girls remains a problem. And we will offer a unique perspective on this issue. We will also analyze the organized crime phenomenon of 'Ndrangheta, which is the Calabrian version of Mafia, and has developed a widespread global network of organized crime criminal power. And finally, we will look at the old problems and new perspectives of the great transformation that the 'Ndrangheta experienced during 1960-1970. In order to present and discuss this wide range of topics, I'll soon give the floors to our speakers, starting with Vincenzo Scalia, professor at the University of Florence. We'll then hear from Sara Mariella Lambertini, PhD student in social sciences and statistics at the University of Naples Federico II. Sara is specialized in transnational organized crime and human trafficking. And finally, on the 'Ndrangheta, we'll have Vincent Figliomeni, director at Francesco Figliomeni's Social Science Research Center, a non-profit independent social science research activity located in Calabria, and Ruggero Clemenza, PhD candidate in organized crime at the University of Milan, whose research focuses on the history of 'Ndrangheta groups in Reggio Calabria. With that, I'd like to start the discussion and hand it over to Vincenzo, whose presentation is about the trattativa and the mafia-state relation. Vincenzo's presentation will try to refute the most common and simplistic views that interpret concepts such as mafia and the state as monolithic and homogeneous blocks, and will show the flawed nature of these approaches, emphasizing the need of a more fluid and critical analysis. So go ahead, Vincenzo, the floor is yours.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you listen to me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, why getting rid of ideal types? Well, in a way, we could argue that modern ideal types are prejudices, but since they are not always prejudices, because they are not only rooted in commonplaces, they are also rooted in analysis and discussion, and especially they are rooted in conceptual definitions, let's say, or conceptual elaborations. We can discuss about ideal types, because Max Weber, who speaks about ideal types, argues that they are like empty shells that must be filled with a kernel. So basically, those who create, for example, the definition of mafia can choose their own fillings, can choose their own kernel to fill the shell with. And on the one hand, an ideal type is very useful. Why? Is useful insofar as it allows us to define a social phenomenon, to have a frame within which we can reflect about, and out of which we can start developing an analytical scheme. Because when we have ideal types, we can categorize, we can order, we can discuss, we can classify. So basically, we are not lost in the sky. We are not sort of floundering, looking for a definition. No, we have some coordinates, some specific points we can hold on to. But at the same time, this categorization, this classification can end up being reductive, if not made fluid, and sometimes can also end up sort of drying up discussion and producing and reproducing stereotypes. So, for example, let's see in the case of organized crime and of the mafia. There are a few ideal types who have turned into stereotype. So the first point is the one of the first ideal type is that of the octopus. The octopus, in Italian la piovra, draws on the idea that since state is supposed to be, is defined to be in a Weberian way, what? As an entity that holds the monopoly of violence on a due territory and upon a specific population, and the mafia doesn't treat it the same in a way, because you have the Sicilian mafia, like you have the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, and you have the Neapolitan Camorra. All these organizations have are sort of competitors, are regarded as competitors of the state in the monopoly of violence on a territory, on a specific population. And the other aspect is that of good versus bad enterprise. So we discuss about dirty economics. We think that you have good enterprise, clean enterprise. In a good enterprise, entrepreneurs to make a profit out of licit activity, whereas dirty economics relies on illegal activities and relies on illegal practices. And then we have the idea of contagion, that was fueled by Diego Gambetta, and is that of private protection. Basically, Gambetta argues that wherever there is public goods that prevails, there's no risk of private protection, therefore there's no risk of the mafia. And it's a very simplistic view, because as the last research is showing, the last inquiries also show, mafias have always spread, the mafias have always spread also in so-called virgin territory that are immune of contagion. But let's see the state. For example, in the Italian case, we discuss about the trattativa, the negotiation between the state of the mafia. There is this narrative about the trattativa, this negotiation that occurred in 1992 during the legitimization crisis the Italian state underwent during the Tangentopoli corruption scandal. And they argue that the outcome of the trattativa would have been Berlusconi's rise as a politician. Well, in this case, we have to think that state is not a monolithic apparatus. There are many conflicting apparatus. And if we see the cases of the trattativa, we can notice that those state senior officers, high-ranking officers who allegedly attempt to negotiate with the mafia were not authorized by the state, by the government or by the parliament, and they did it on their own. And this is, we can explain this through the idea that state is indeed, yes, on the one hand, a combination of apparatuses, but on the other hand, there are conflicts within the same state apparatuses. And again, state is represented as an homogeneous entity, but there are many local realities. So, and there's a French author, for example, Bourdieu, but also Baltrusitis, who argued that what happens with state is that state undergoes anamorphosis. That is, sometimes states, in order to prevail, adapt to local reality. And this is partly what happens in southern Italy. That is, the Savoy monarchy was unable to neglect such realities under 'Ndrangheta, as the Camorra, as the Mafia, so that not only the existence of organized crime was denied for quite a large amount of time, but also there was a sort of accommodation between the different entities. That is, there was also an informal recognition of the fact that this organization wielded power. We should think about, for example, what happened during elections, all the patronage network that is sometimes that was very often supported, backed by the mafia. So it's not always true that state radically opposes itself to the mafia, or that mafia is radically opposed to the state. The two entities very often come to negotiate. And then in the case of the contagion, basically, Gambetta draws on the scheme provided both by Robert Putnam with his idea of civicness, arguing that Northern and Central Italian economies and societies developed because of a higher rate of civicness than Southern Italian regions. And also, there is the idea that in the South, opposite to the North, there is the so-called amoral families, that is, the instrumental use of family links as a means of attainment of individual advantages, something that would be detrimental to civicness. So for this reason, Gambetta says there is a contagion in the North. When mafia spreads in the North, we have a contagion, that is, amoral families spreads and sort of chokes civicness. But reality tells us another story. Since 1950s, when Michele Sindona settled himself in Milan, that is the wealthiest area of Italy, the biggest stock exchange in Italy, and one of the 5 most prominent in Europe, Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, had been investing through him in Milan Stock Exchange. But there is more. In new inquiries such as Vulcano, Emilia, on the case of the 'Ndrangheta Padana, we find it was found out that it's the entrepreneurs themselves who asked the 'Ndrangheta a partnership, who boast this partnership with their competitors. Say, guy, I am one on the 'Ndrangheta. I am in connection with the 'Ndrangheta, so you should scare of me. Or even the accountant, the Bologna accountant, telling her colleagues, I work with the 'Ndrangheta, I deal with a quite high amount of money. So if we see the mafia state ideal type, we see that we have a central state, market economy relying on the rules provided by central states, and then social civicness that build up a mafia-free society. But some other authors, for example, Vincenzo Ruggero, tells us that it is unthinkable to develop clean economics without dirty economics, because organized crime provides, for example, cheap labor recruitment and regulates labor relations. Well, in New York in 1930s, it was unthinkable to employ Sicilian or Italians without the intermediation of the mafias. The dumping of wastes. So there are many activities that dirty economics provide to clean economics, and the other way around, through the laundering of dirty money, it is possible for so-called clean economy to develop. And there are also other services such as drugs, gambling, prostitution, that are provided, which are provided by dirty economics to clean society. And more than this, market is only one. So when we go basically to buy ourselves a cup of coffee, cup of espresso, like I will do at the end of this presentation at the barman won't ask us whether we are using dirty money or clean money. What he cares about, or she cares about, is that we have money to pay our coffee. So how was it possible? Basically, if we make a genealogy of interpretation, we find out that the first point was that before 1982, the Italian state never admitted to the fact that organized crime existed. And then that once it was admitted, it was used as an emergency to re-legitimize a state that was into a deep legitimization crisis, because it was, how could we say, battered by different scandals such as corruption, terrorism. And this search for re-legitimization by state apparatuses matched the bids that moral entrepreneurs such as journalists, activists, new generation of politics made for them to rise our public subjects. So the combination between the search for re-legitimization by the state and the quest for public celebrity and fame and success by journalists, activists, a new generation of politicians made the spread of ideal type easier. So this means that the issue of organized crime has been oversimplified. And for example, they say Cosa Nostra was weakened, but was it weakened or it just changed, just transformed? But at the same time, other criminal organizations are on the rise. And then the idea of legality in Italy means a legitimization of emergency laws that sometimes violate individual rights, like the presumption of innocence and the pressure for becoming a supergrass. So anti-mafia, moreover, has risen to become a pop genre. Like pop music, like pop cinema, you have pop anti-mafia. The Italian TV is rife with lots of TV serials. On bookshop shelves, you will find as many anti-mafia books as you like, provided by people who just want to try to start out a career in the mafia, in journalism, and write something about mafia or Italian mysteries. Leonardo Sciascia, the guy with the pitted deer, a very famous Sicilian novelist, called them the professionals of anti-mafia. So is there a way out? Well, basically, we should think about a wider frame. For example, in Mexico, we had a paradoxical case wherein organized crime until 1982 was ruled by the state, or in the Russian case when some mafiosi, some Cevo people had strong ties, strong connections with politicians. Or we should consider the issue of prohibitionism. For example, if we legalize drugs, would organized crime weaken? We should think about civil liberties, the respect of civil liberties, and also politics of social integrations. So in order to conclude, because maybe I've spoken too much, let's think of a new model. Let's think of, state is the product of conflicts, and these conflicts constantly take place inside the state. Economics are blurred because they can be dirty and clean at the same time. And society is a twofold or manifold fabric, because there's civicness, there is individualism, there is an instrumental attitude aspect as well as a value-based attitude. And legality is contradictory because it can both mean the respect of civil liberties or its suspension. So we should think of a new model to get out of a legal emergency. Thanks very much for your attention.
Great. Thank you very much, Vincenzo, for this very interesting presentation, with which I think you have tried to demonstrate that common ideal types on the study of organized crime and are generally inaccurate. And this is particularly evident in the case of the mafia-state relation. So now I leave the floor to Sara, whose presentation is titled Nigerian Criminal Networks in Campania, Southern Italy. Thank you, Sara.
Hello, good morning. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Do you see the presentation? Yes? Okay, perfect. So, okay, I will change the topic with the Nigerian criminal networks in Campania. That is another point of view of these criminal activities. So I would like to say that Italy has a long tradition with organized crime, especially those defined as mafia, as we say, Nangrandeta, Cosa Nostra, Camorra, Sacra Corona Unita. But in this scenario, foreign organized criminal groups, such as Nigerian cults, appear to be a virus in the system. Moreover, Italian authorities and public opinion tend to attribute the trafficking in Nigerian women and girls to exogenous and well-structured criminal organizations run by men, known as Mafia Nigeriana or Black Mafia. However, empirical evidence might offer a different interpretation of the phenomenon. So, okay, yeah. Okay, I would like to talk a little bit about the methodology that I use to understand these networks. So I use content analysis with the judiciary document, the pretrial detention orders in the region of Campania from 2003 to 2019. I have 9 criminal networks with double condition. Have to be Nigerian-based groups, so citizens from Nigeria, and have to be accused of trafficking in human beings, THB, or sexual exploitation in Campania. I apply social network analysis technique, the phone tape conversation between the criminals, and I can identify who spoke to whom, how many times did they talk, and what did they talk about. And I use a software, Jeffy 0.9, to create this network. So I will start with the less complex to the more complex ones. I have to say the blue ones are men's, the blue dots, excuse me, are the men's, the pink ones are women's, and the green ones are victims or family of the victim. So this is a very simple network. I call them the horizontal organization, that we can see different madams, as we say, in 1 and 2, with different contacts as recruitment, the troller, the pastor in Nigeria, and everything. And one man that was an exploiter, that is very particular. This is a role that a man that did this role of exploiter. Another, the THB family business, and it's very interesting this solve, because we have all the family, the madam that was here in Italy, the brothers here in Italy too, but in different cities of Italy, the mother of this family in Nigeria, and another brother in Nigeria, and all the family runs the activity of trafficking of human beings. And the madam that was here in Italy was, of course, the leader, because we can see all the contact that she had, and all the operation was run for her. And another case, the multiple decision centers. As we can see, we have different clusters. One exploiter, the different madams, and they have multiple contacts, and they act independently, one of the other. And they have some contacts in common, yes, that this one recruited one, this other that it was the one, and a man in Nigeria, and everything, this other recruitment in Nigeria, but they act independently, one of the others. Another case, in the geographical distribution of the criminal actor was the key factor. They were established in Italy and in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe. The madams were distributed in different cities in Italy and other European countries. As we can see, there was the principal madam, and the other madam that were in the other parts of Italy or in Europe, in particular in France and Germany. One of the men that was the recruiter, that was one of the cluster, the principal actors in these cells, and this other that was the trolley, that is the man that the group of men that bring the girls from Nigeria to Italy and from Italy to another countries. And it was the key factor. They were distributed in Africa, in Italy, and another part of the world. And we arrived in a particular group. There was, I call the madam in the middle, because we can see this madam here, that they connect two different worlds, two different markets. Here, on the left, we have drugs, and we can see that the male composition of this cell is predominant. And in the other hand, here in the right, we have the THB market with different madam, as we can see, the recruitment, there was a cluster, a principal actor, and the other matters that were linked into this cell. And this madam in the middle, as you can see, you can cancel these women, and the different part, the two different markers will run independently without any problem. So she was a bridge between the two markets, but it wasn't essential for them. We can change a little bit. This is a female mafia. This is very interesting case because, as you can see, this madam that was in the middle controlled almost all the operations, has the most contact with everybody, and was a principal cluster here. As soon as in 3, that was another cluster, and in 3, that was the other one. So for the first time, Italian authorities tried to identify a Nigerian criminal group as a mafia style. It was a female mafia style organization. This woman has a vertical structures. They identify themselves like the Submother Association and things like that. And they have rules. They have a common fund to reinvest the money to bring more girls to Italy. They have a vertical structure. They try to control the schedule of the girls, the places where the girls have to prostitute. It was a very interesting case. And with, as you can see, run all by women. No, with the female, with the male guidance. And we change to another group, drugs and THB. And we can see that there are 3 different subgroups here. Here in the left, drugs again, with a male participation, a predominant male participation. We have another group here that we can see is only THB with a female participation, some clusters as madam that control that coordinate with other madams in the work, the recruitment that was men, other madams that are the cluster, and we have this other group here in the middle that we can see they work to the drug trafficking and THB. And this is particular because in this group, one victim and one guy that was controlled by a madam were used as a drug mule for this group here, another group. It's very important because it's something that sometimes we can see in THB cases, that the victim is used as a mule in order to pay part of the debt that they have to contract to gain here in Italy. And we have another kind of organized crime, that is the Black Axe, one of the cults, the most famous cult in the world, and here in Italy. And we can see that only one affiliate that is with this one, X-Men 1, was an exploitator with other 2 women, with the help with other 2 women, that's in 1 and in 2, that they offer girls from him, but only was evidence of only one victim was an exploiter, but the entire cell doesn't work with the THB, was only him. because the central activity of the group was drug trafficking. And we have the last one. There is the Sopranai Confraternity, another of the famous cults that works here in Italy. And this is totally different. In this case, 2 women were involved in indoor sexual exploitation with the connection houses. And these are these 2 madams that I put here. These women were affiliated to this group. That is important too, because normally Nigerian cult doesn't accept the affiliation of women as the Black Axe. The Sopranai Confraternity accept the affiliation of women, of course, for roles that are diverse, not for the roles as a leader, but for the prostitution, more or less. But at the same time, THB and sexual exploitation doesn't appear the central illicit activity of this group, because this group, the principal activity was the drug trafficking too. Only these 2 women were involved in sexual exploitation. So what are the conclusions? THB and sexual exploitation in the Campania region appears to be an activity carried out by criminal networks led by women, with a central role linking to other people with more peripheral participation. Women manage the entire process independently, from recruitment to exploitation, with male participation for particular activities, such as recruitment and transportation of victims. These women can act individually, as well as organize themselves rudimentarily, with a territorial distribution of tasks, managing to have greater efficiency in the legal activity. Additionally, they can form more complex structure. However, this does not mean that they are subject to the guidance of male figure in Italy or Nigeria, nor that they have a link to the Nigerian cults. Another thing that we have to say is that this is a particular criminal model that tends to self-reproduce. An exploited woman that ends as a madam. On the other hand, there is evidence of racketing, yes, but it's not possible to be 100% sure whether they have to pay to the Nigerian cults or the local criminals, in particular here in Campania, La Camorra. And something that we have to notice that there is a change in the model, because there is an increase in male presence in the role of exploiter. That was a role that generally was compared by the women. So thank you very much. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. As you have highlighted in your presentation, trafficking in Nigerian women and girls seems to be a problem, seems to still be a problem here in Italy, but apparently we don't know much about how these criminal organizations work, and we often tend to rely on inaccurate or outdated data. So thank you very much for this contribution, because we have seen lots of indications that this is very much an evolving field. Now I would leave the floor to Vincent, whose presentation is titled Demystifying 'Ndrangheta, Challenging the Organized Crime Phenomenon of Calabria. Go ahead, Vincent.
Okay, let's see if you got my screen. Let's go into the presentation mode here.
Yeah.
Okay, have it? Okay, great. Okay, so Vincent Pigliomeni from Cittadino Marina, Reggio Calabria. I'm an American, if you hadn't figured that out from my accent. And so I've been in Italy for about 40 years. I'm enjoying every day that I'm still here. But the one thing that has bothered me since my first visit to Salerno, the birthplace of my father, 40 years ago, is the presence and persistence of the Italian Mafia of Calabria, which is called 'Ndrangheta. I will show you in this book here that I've just written, published in this year in March, some of the background and experience that I have. We won't be able to go into all that in this presentation because it's so short, but I just want to let you know that I'm not speaking out of a book or somebody else's research. I'm speaking a lot from personal experience and direct knowledge. a lifetime of hearing about and being curious about, and now academically approaching how do we get at this phenomenon called Ndrangheta. And that's the book. And so if you want any more information after we're done with this, it will provide it. So the book is broken down into two parts. One is a descriptive. Part one, description of Ndrangheta, just to give people an idea of the difference between it and the Mafia of Sicily, Cosa Nostra, the Camorra of the Campania region in Napoli, and Santa Corona Unita of Puglia, and other branches and so forth that are present in Italy. So I'll focus on that, and then part two I'll get into some of the way ahead. Where do we go from here? So what is mafia organized crime? I break that down. Basically, if you look in red, I've highlighted much of what I think are the core messages in my slides in red, so that we can get through this quickly. But there's basically 130 groups plus 10,000 core members, and then that doesn't count all the affiliates, surrogates, supporters, and wannabes that are out there that are more than willing to help the cause of their own personal benefit at the expense of the society. When did they originate? Well, you can go back to the story of the occupation of Italy over 200 years ago, and you can work your way back from the Risorgimento and then into the unification of Italy by Garibaldi in 1860s. And then you can talk about how it has been and continues to be very difficult for the central government of Italy to govern in southern Italy because of the cultural ties that have been ever present here, and local power brokers who have always been a lot more, let's say, influential than some central government that purports to care about the people here, when in actuality, I can tell you that that's not the case. And that's not a condemnation on Italy. It's a problem that they've had, and I think Vincenzo talked about it earlier about not recognizing the fact that there is organized crime in southern Italy. It's part of it has been part of the problem. You got to recognize your problem before you can fix it. So we'll move on from there. Why Calabria? Well, it's because it is a backward, slow to develop region, the poorest region of all of the regions in Italy. And within it, there is an integrated manipulating cultural element called Ndrangheta, which does influence social, economic, and political environments very heavily. So let me just stop there for a minute and give you just a quick example. If you got a problem with a medical problem and you're on some list for some medical intervention, some surgery, and around in southern Italy, you won't find a hospital that's really got the capability to do it. You got to go to Bologna, you got to go to Milano, and you're on this list, and you're 100 down on the list. And if you need this surgery quick enough, where do you go? You go to the government and say, gee, I really need this? No, you go to the local power brokers and say, who do we have? Who do we know that's influential that can break this bottleneck and get me into that operating room quicker? And those would be the local people who have the localized local control enough to reach out and be able to influence that. Believe it or not, that actually has happened. So let me move on from there. I take my, let's say, explanation for Ndrangheta. You can pick your poison, figure out, if you want to go to a biological or cultural or some other kind of explanation for how this thing developed and existed. I choose Merton and the Chicago school behind it, which basically says that this is a socioeconomically profitable and lucrative thing to do. When you are depressed, part of a community, let's say a community at large in Italy, and you will accept the fact that to get ahead, you got to, wealthy. It's like the Italian version of the American dream, but to get ahead, you can't follow the rules. And so, in the strain theory and anomie, in that light, you'd look at it in terms of accepting the institutional prescribed goals, but reject institutionally prescribed legitimate legal means of of achieving those goals. I'll say no more about that. Where do they operate? Well, they're in Italy, they're in southern Italy, and they're in Europe, all throughout Europe, Australia, United States, and Canada. Documented. No question about it. I'll move on from there. And these are reports from the DIA, which is the anti-mafia agency that tracks criminality throughout the world, and in particular focused on Italian mafias. All right, now this is one slide. It's kind of cluttered, but I wanted to put these three things on one slide for a reason. And this is, how do they do this? You know, everybody asks, well, how do they do that? Well, that thing I talked about earlier about going to the local power broker and getting things done, you know, rather than going to the local government or regional government or national government, that holds true. And it holds true in such a way as I label this thing a parallel system of authority. So it's you have your authority, the legitimate authority recognized by the government, rule of law, and then underneath it, you got this thing that say, okay, well, that doesn't work. We're going to go to this. The problem is around here, that underneath is what really functions quite efficiently, and for good reason, because it's for profit, it's for prestige, it's for power. The second thing is status quo. If you want to get anything done in southern Italy, you got to go through the power brokers, and that's where they keep things the way they are, the way they can control it. If you want to do anything new that might threaten the span of control that they have, then they're probably not going to allow that to happen, because that way they lose control. So the status quo is very important. Keep things the way they are, move them along very slowly, but always make sure that we, being the 'Ndrangheta, interests are looked after more so than any other aspects of whatever creative ideas or creative development one might be able to present. Okay, and then the gray zone. That's that interaction between the upper world and the underworld. Okay, that's this political thing. I think Vincenzo also touched upon that, where there's an association between those that are in legitimate positions of power and those that are in this, you know, unwritten position of power and influence. And there's a marriage of ideas and a marriage of influences and a marriage of beneficial, mutual benefit by both. And that's where the issue becomes entangled into, well, we'll move forward only if we can, and if we can, we get the power and the authority of a legitimate government on our side, and then we can move forward with all the other things that come with it underneath. Okay, so let's move on from there. Who are among them? You'd think they're a bunch of folks, like on my book, I see the cover there with some guys with these fedoras and these, you know, big black trench coats lurking around in the shadows. Well, not necessarily, and absolutely not, because they're professional entrepreneurs, they're highly skilled, they're lawyers, they're doctors, they're folks that are in the community, well suited. They're also unemployed, thugs, and bums, for lack of a better term. So there's a mixed bag. But the most important thing is what Nicola Gratteri, who is the anti-mafia prosecutor from Catanzaro, who's unfortunately going to be leaving us to go up to Naples to deal with Camorra very shortly. He's done many publications on this subject, and what he's found in his research in the demographics is that a large percent, 60% practically, of all the folks that were involved in 'Ndrangheta crimes in the past were under the age of 45. So it's not something that old men sitting in bars, you know, thinking up, you know, things to make money for themselves are involved in. It's an array of young people as well, because if I haven't made it clear, there's not much going on in Calabria in terms of economic development, in terms of moving forward and socioeconomic and social mobility. So most people, like my kids, have all moved, gone up north, or gone to another country to make their way, while those that stay behind fight their way through the system, or they get involved in this particular 'Ndrangheta mystery, I'll call it. Okay, so the Maxi trials are going on now. Down at the bottom, you'll see similar demographic data was gleaned from all the defendants. There's about 400 defendants that have been on trial for various 'Ndrangheta mafia-related crimes. And so it stands that it is real, and it is spread among younger people as well as it is the older generation. Okay, so developing a comprehensive. So now we're going to get over here to part 2, where I talk about getting into the an overview of what Italy has done. They've done a great job of tracking crimes. They've done a great job of bringing folks to justice, but it's not enough. Okay, you can get at the acts, the actions and activities of organized crime, but you got to get at the fundamental, the elements of power that give them give the 'Ndrangheta the capability to do the conspiracies, collusion, and corruption, and those behavior influences, because it is embedded in the cultural awareness of every citizen that's in this part of the world, that the 'Ndrangheta rules, and so cultural, social, economic, and political influences are very real here. And you understand who you're dealing with when you're dealing with. You don't even have to say their name. You just understand who they are, and you do what they tell you to do because you understand the consequences. And so this is what's in the mystery, and that's why I labeled the book Demystifying 'Ndrangheta, because that's the mafia behavioral mystique phenomenon that we need to get at. So while we're now flip to the next slide. While we're tracking crimes, we need to track what's behind the crimes. What are those associations that give the mafia type behavioral paradigm its life? Okay, and that's what this slide is all about. Developing a practical counter 'Ndrangheta, anti-'Ndrangheta strategy means you got to get at what's going on behind the scenes. Not enough just to bring folks down, prosecute them for the crime of X. Not enough. Okay, because crime X is going to happen again and again and again. Why? Because the environment conducive for those individuals in that stage of influence, that is the thing that needs to be interdicted. Okay, and that's very hard to do because it's embedded in people's psyche. It's a social psychological phenomenon that takes generations to get rid of. But Italy needs to start. If they're ever going to, now that they're recognizing 'Ndrangheta 15 years ago as an actual no-kidding organized criminal element, now it's time to look at, okay, now how do we get at it for real? How do we really interdict it? Okay, so the second paragraph down there is, I use situational crime prevention. Now, this is a framework, okay? It's a model. I'm not going to solve the problem. I don't solve the problem with this book, but I offer some kind of a way ahead to use what I call dynamic operational design planning and assessment approach. It's just a system. It's a system of making sure that whatever you propose to do, you track it. You make sure that you see, was it what I wanted to do? Okay. Did I do it right? Okay. And did it create the effect that I intended? And if it did, okay, we move on from there. And if it didn't, okay, well, we got to figure out something else. So it's just a systematic method using also PESTEL, the political, economic, social, technological, and legal, and environment considerations when you construct these kinds of tasks that you're going to perform, actions you're going to take, and then whether or not those have the effect that you intend, and in the end, whether or not it does reduces the crime, causes them to go, do a loop around and go to another aspect of their criminality or whatever. Okay, so that's what that's all about. This is just a little design thing that I made. A plan of action gets at focusing on the drug. I use an example in the book of drug trafficking in the port of Gioia Tauro. And those of you who know anything about Gioia Tauro, you know that it's every week there's another bust of X amount of cocaine transiting through illegally being transported through the port of Gioia Tauro. Estimates are about 10% is what we discover. The other 90% go their separate ways. And then on the second part of the plan of action, developing how to stop that. While you're doing that, you do what I call a campaign plan. So you expand that plan of action to focus not only on the crime, but what's behind the crime. And again, it's the cultural, social, economic, and political influences that gave that particular situation the favorability toward committing the crime. And then you get at the people behind the crime, and that's where we're going to get to this next thing here. So that's a little explanation that I guess I just gave it. Okay, here we go. So what am I recommending? Follow-up research. So what's next? Secondary research, Available data is out there, qualitative, quantitative data, but also original research that can include public opinion surveys, network analysis for trying to figure out where those cultural, social, economic, and political influences lie, and then what to do about them. What happens in a criminal case is a lot of the evidentiary stuff, you focus on it, you put it over here, okay, great. All the other stuff, okay, who social issues, political issues, who these people are tied to, who the actors are tied to, falls to the wayside. And that's where the social scientist, the criminologist, needs to be there to catch those things and say, okay, wait a minute, hang on. This has value because from this, we can figure out what they're going to do next. Or this, we're going to figure out what we need to do to stop, deflect, prevent, interdict, and do the kinds of actions that the legitimate authorities need to do in order to obstruct this thing from happening again. And then the emphasis obviously is on the social, economic, and political aspects, because down at the bottom here in red in that paragraph, major effort recommended simultaneously, okay, while you're doing the cases, to focus on those other aspects behind the scenes that give the 'Ndrangheta its ability to operate. And then with that, I'll take your questions at the end of the panel. Thank you very much for your attention. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you. So we are a bit, time is not in our favor right now. So I will just quickly hand it over to Ruggero for his presentation, which is titled The Great Transformation of 'Ndrangheta 1960-1970, All Problems and New Perspective. Ruggero, the floor is yours, and please try to stay within the 10 minutes. Thank you.
Yes. Good morning. I'm Ruggero Clemenza. So my research is about the great transformation of 'Ndrangheta. Okay. All problems and new perspectives, and it is the outcome of my doctoral research, which focuses on the history of 'Ndrangheta groups in the province of Reggio Calabria from the 1945 to the 1970. But today I will only focus on the last decade of my time frame, maybe the 60s. I chose to focus on the 60s because in this time, 'Ndrangheta groups underwent remarkable growth in terms of use of violence, influence in the society, and economical status. And this evolution changed the way in which 'Ndrangheta was perceived. She gained the status of mafia, and it prompted scholars to use a Polanyi expression of great transformation to define it. My aim today is to highlight the aporias present in the existing literature and also to show the possible contribution that can come from recent approaches within the historiography of organized crime. For a long time, 'Ndrangheta has been considered as a minor organization. Therefore, right now there are relatively fewer studies, and particularly, there are very few studies of historical literature, scientific historical literature. Furthermore, if we look in those few studies, we can see a sort of a void in the year I'm focusing on, where we have very few information about the evolution of 'Ndrangheta groups. And it is a relevant void because in those years, 'Ndrangheta completely transformed, going from something that in 1945 was described as not even as a mafia, but rather as a form of banditism, to a mafia like in the end of the 60s, which was very rich and entrenched with the state and seen as danger for economic prosperity and the public safety of Reggio Calabria province. The major cause of this void is the scarcity of historical sources. Yes, okay. These two factors led also to some problematic interpretation of this growth, of this great transformation. We can identify two main levels of explanation for this growth, which are in the existing literature. The first one is called the entrepreneurial mafia. In Italian is the Mafia Imprenditrice, written by sociologist Pino Arlacchi. According to this theory, after World War II, Sicilian mafia and 'Ndrangheta lost their popular consensus, and they were left something like common criminals. This prompted mafia bosses to seek entrepreneurial success to regain their social prestige and wealth. And this is kind of discredited in the academic circle, but it's still widespread in the common sense, in the common discourse. The second level of explanations focus on the role of the state, of the public investments in the economy of Reggio Calabria. According to this theory, the flux of public money that was poured into the region during the 60s triggered the rise of mafia by creating a lot of possibilities to corruption. This theory is partially true, as we will see, but today it appears to be too simplistic, and also like it's embedded in a cultural framework of prejudice towards southern Italy. So how did I try to overcome these problems? The first thing, my main concern was to find more historical sources. So firstly, I resorted to publicistic sources in a systematic way. I tried to use sources from local newspaper and also national newspapers. And I also tried to use sources from different political areas. From there, here you can see there are some from the left side and some more like governmental. But of course, for criminal history, the main sources of the judicial sources and governmental ones, which for many reasons, they are not available to us, they are not in the archives. So I went to the tribunals of the Reggio Calabria's province, to Reggio Calabria, Parma and Locri, where I found a total of 60 sentences, more or less. And also, I am trying to collect information about the judiciary and police personnel who were involved in the fight against organized crime during the 60s. So namely, I'm trying to I'm looking for the biographies of prefects, police commissioners, and public prosecutors. Why am I doing that? Because in the recent years, we had some new recent approaches which have been proven useful to the study of Italian mafia. For example, Francesco Benigno, an historian, shows us mafia as a socially constructed phenomenon, which means that its criminal identity changes over time, is not given per se, but it is strictly related to the wider cultural and political debate. At the same time, like scholars like Vittorio Coco and Salvatore Lupo focus on the police forces side and highlighted that not only the way in which police forces are organized has a great influences of the image of the mafia we get, but also they highlighted the lack of knowledge we have of the organization of police forces in the Italian Republic during the first decades. Without taking in consideration this aspect, we cannot have a real understanding of the growth of mafia during the 60s. Indeed, this cannot be attributed to one factor or to the other one, but it's rather a combination of factors that are linked to each other and that influence each other. We can, for example, one of the main, we have to consider, for example, the opportunities offered by changes in the legal and legal markets in the Reggio Calabria province. We also have to consider the increased attention towards the mafia phenomenon, which was driven by new political contents who rose in the 60s, which also led to some methodological improvements in the fight against organized crime implemented by police forces, which, as a reaction, provoked an evolution in the criminal methods and the organizational structures used by the 'Ndrangheta groups of the region. Let's look at them one by one. I don't know how much time do I have, but you will let me know. So, during my research from the judicial sources, I observed that the rise of 'Ndrangheta started years before the start of the public influx of money. Why? A possible explanation is offered to us by a study who was kind of neglected in the academic circles by Giovanni Arrighi and Fortunata Piselli, which show us how the economy of Reggio Calabria during the 60s suffered from a major economic crisis, especially in the agricultural sector, in which like a part of the landowners decided to sell their land and invest in the building sector. The remaining part chose to innovate their business, but both they had to cope with demands for increased wages by workers and also increased competition. This created the perfect environment for mafia groups to do what historically they do best. So the use of reputational capital and violence to regulate job markets, thus controlling labor and reducing competition, and the use of social capital, through which they gain legitimacy in the eyes of the entrepreneurial and local political class. Opportunity arose also in the illegal markets, mainly because of the illegal smuggling of tobacco, in which the Calabria coastline became central during the 60s, which also brought Ndrangheta groups to establish a closer relationship with Cosa Nostra, with Sicilian Cosa Nostra, which solidify the criminal status of many of the bosses of Ndrangheta. But, however, if we look at crime statistics, as you can see on the table, you can observe that the rise was not very pronounced during those years, but at the same time, attention towards the Ndrangheta phenomenon grew constantly, both in the press and in police report. How do we explain this fact? We cannot understand it without looking at the broader political context. We have to consider that, for example, in 1962 broke out the Prima Guerra di Mafia, the first war of the Sicilian Mafia, which gained a lot of attention at the national level, and it actually led to the creation of the first parliamentary anti-mafia commission, an inquiry commission, which also it was possible because in 1962 it was the start of a new season of governments led by center-left coalition between the Christian Democrats and parts of the Socialist Party, which was way more concerned about this problem and much more favorable towards it than the Christian Democrats alone. This new context, this new climate, also allowed new repressive methods to grow. For example, in the province of Reggio Calabria, there were men like the police commissioner Emilio Santillo and prosecutor Guido Neri who struggle to really make an effort to fight organized crime with new methods. For example, Santillo's ditched the inefficient methods of the large raids across the countryside, but instead he focused on the soggiorno obbligato, where you send suspect mafiosi away from the territory, and also he focused on the suspicious wealth of mafiosi. And this, as a reaction, we can see that the structure of the structure and the methods of the 'Ndrangheta changed over time. They became more violent on one hand, as bomb attacks became frequently, almost on a daily basis, bomb attacks against political and institutional targets. But also, on the other hand, they try to unify it and establish a closer coordination between them to better counterattack, to better resist the newly increased pressure by police forces. I don't know if I have time. No, I don't think so. So I think I've been clear, and I will thank you. I'll leave you the floor to you. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you very much, Ruggero. And yeah, sorry, I'm afraid we have just a few minutes for questions. So I'd like to ask you to be quick in your answers. Thank you to all the panelists, first of all, because I think you have provided very interesting presentations, and something they are also different but similar in a certain way, and something that connects all of them for me is that they try to give a real sense of the complexity that lays behind studies on Italian mafia. They try to overcome our limits in understanding the phenomenon. So maybe a question that I could pose to everyone is if you have since I have realized that basically there are gaps in the analysis of mafia. Existing literature is lacking at times. So I wanted to ask if you have found challenges in collecting your data, and what have been the main challenges that you have encountered. I don't know, we can start with Sara. I was really impressed by the amount of data she collected. So maybe Sara, if you can talk a little bit of what have been the main difficulties in collecting your data, and then everyone can feel free to jump in with their answers.
Yes, one limitation, of course, is that I use judiciary records. So the access to this information is very limited. So you depend on the authorities. And on the other hand, I create this network with the information that is put in these records. But of course, it doesn't. It's only one representation of the whole world, because I use, yes, like in some cases I count like 100 contacts between the different criminals, but it's only one part, because all the other telephone calls, the other contacts, they doesn't put it in the orders, because you only use one part of these conversations. The conversation that the authorities believe that are the most important conversations, are the most important actors, but it's only one part. So you have like a black part of the investigation that you doesn't have access to. That is the limitation of this technique. But of course, I think all the techniques have these different problems and different limitations. I will say that.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything on that point.
Yes, I think I can double down on that, because this is what I mentioned earlier about what doesn't meet the evidentiary level for law enforcement gets cast to the wayside, and in that can be some elements that are very important for understanding how the act was committed, with what association, with what linkages to other people, to other things, to other influences. And that's where the social scientist and criminologist comes into play. And it must be a multidisciplinary kind of approach as well. And this is the other problem I think I can add to what you said. In criminology, we have say that's a limitation in law enforcement data, but you got economists, you got psychologists, you got other folks that are in other fields that can add immense depth of understanding, which can help us piece together the puzzle. And it is a puzzle. It's a very complex puzzle, and you hit it there right, Chiara. It's a very complex puzzle that needs to be reconstructed in order to get at, so now what are you gonna do? See, I'm not a theory guy, really, although I may sound like one. It's really what's practical. What can you get at? What effect can you have that can actually, no kidding, interdict a harm from occurring? And in a societal way, harms come in many shapes and sizes. So I leave you with that. It's a challenge to get the right elements together, to get the right pieces together in a multidisciplinary fashion in order to reconstruct the phenomenon of organized crime.
Thank you, Vincent, for your contribution. We have a few minutes left before we close, so I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that, leave their comments. Otherwise, I will draw a conclusion. But please, Ruggero or Vincenzo, you still have like around 3 minutes to say to add anything if you want.
No, it's fine to me. I mean, been enough.
Okay, Ruggero.
He wants that coffee that he talked about earlier. The barista is waiting for him right now. Oh, Vincenzo. Hey, I'd just like to say that to the other panelists, I thought that your presentations were quite intriguing, and I welcome your collaboration anytime. We have all of each other's contact info, and especially Ruggero, I know you're just starting out. Whatever help an old guy like me can give to you, I'm happy to do it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Great.
You too, Sarah.
Great. I also think that if you want, you could share your presentations with people that want to have like your presentations, or maybe want to pose questions separately by email or whatever. They can contact you, and I think you will be more than happy to provide your answers in writing. Unfortunately, today we don't have the time to hear from people from the audience. But yeah, I think it's been a very engaging discussion, very interesting contributions from our experts. With that, I think we can draw a conclusion. So I'd like to say thank you very much to all the 4 speakers for their great and very, very, very interesting presentations. Also, thank you to all the participants and the organizers of the conference, the Secretariat, for their great facilitation of this panel. I'd also like to encourage everyone to go back to the conference website and check out the upcoming panels. I think the next ones are coming in like 15 minutes. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of the day and enjoy your coffees. So bye. Thank you.